central government turning India into a surveillance state, and while the debate over the Modi government snooping order and the planned curbs in social media firm rages on, we of course got you the voice that matters, Justice B. Sri Krishna, and it's time to really take the discussion full on as far as these laws are concerned. Joining me on this show, and my producer Ananya points this out to me, we've got a Sanjay Trinity there. Sanjay Hegre, Senior Advocate of the Supreme Court of India. Sanjay Jain, former Chief Product Manager, UIDI, and a volunteer at iSpread Foundation. And we also, of course, have Sanjay Jha representing the Congress party here, and Vineet Goenka, member of the BJP and also the ex-national co-convener of the IT cell. Thank you very much, each one of you, for being with us. And just for the benefit of our viewers as well as all you gentlemen there, Justice Sri Krishna, who is the architect in many ways of the draft privacy bill, was with us a short while back, and he said it is unconstitutional. And in fact, besides Parliament, nobody else can make the law because the Supreme Court has now given a law on privacy. IT Act dates back to 2008. So I'm just going to keep all of that in purview and really take some questions. Sanjay Hegre, I have to begin the legal framework with you. Justice Sri Krishna, who is in some ways, like I said, the architect of the Data Privacy Act, told us it's unconstitutional because Supreme Court judgment on privacy came a lot after the IT Act came into being. Parliament alone can legislate if a change needs to be made. But here it seems that by an executive order, changes are likely to be made. Some comments have been asked for and all of that. Section 79 of the IT Act, and that is where the concern really is. Is it possible to make this change, and will it stand the legal scrutiny of law?
See, a lot of government work and executive orders are passed on the basis that even if it is of doubtful legality, the challenge in courts will take time. We will see how we can defend the challenge later. Let us pass it now. This is unfortunately bureaucratic and political thinking in India, even when there are well-wishers like Justice Sri Krishna warning them that the situation has changed after the Supreme Court judgment on privacy, and specifically a 9-judge judgment on privacy. This is a government which is there in its last few months in office. It needs possibly to show its supporters that it is doing something about a lot of things on social media, etc., which do not seem to be cooperating with their narrative. So possibly they will pass this in the form of subordinate legislation and wait for it to be challenged and defend it later in the courts if they are ever elected back to office.
Okay, defend it later in the court. For now, let's just pass it, and that seems to be the virtue there. But let me just take it across to the Treasury benches. And Vineet Goenka, the Supreme Court in 2015 in the Shreya Sehgal case had struck down Section 66A of the IT Act, which had allowed arrest of those allegedly posting offensive online content. In some way, are you not turning the wheel back with this amendment, and which obviously is in opposition to not just the privacy law of the Supreme Court and that verdict, but also to the Shreya Sehgal case of 2015?
So, Supriya ji, with the change of technology, the criminality also changes, and the requirement of the state also changes. Here, there is a consultative process which is going on. The consultative process is between the officers and the representatives of various social media platforms, and I think this is a welcome step. Never before in the country we have seen this kind of consultative process being held. So here let us wait for the outcome of that process to come out. Once the outcome of the process is done, it will be put to the minister. Then the minister, if deemed fit, will put it to the larger bench, that is the group of ministers, and other than that, then this will be discussed in the House. It will be premature for us to jump and say a consultative process may lead to an ordinance and may lead to a bill. It's a consultative process to understand how we can leverage technology for betterment of the humanity and also avoid any kind of anti-social or anti-lawful activity on the social media platform. And is it wrong to say if we can put some kind of responsibility, we can put in some kind of traceability in the system, which will help the LES, the law enforcement agencies, to work better? I think it's a premature for us to jump and say that there will be some kind of ordinance which will come out.
Okay, maybe not an ordinance, but I think there is a larger concern out there that this could come down very heavily on our freedom of speech, on our privacy rights. You're telling platforms to willfully and proactively remove content. Even the ISPs and, service providers like Airtel and Vodafone could do that. But just to be the devil's advocate, and I may want to put your point across to Sanjay Jha. And Sanjay, I know, at least I'm very critical of this, and I know some of us on the panel also are. But don't you think technology is ever evolving? I mean, in the last 10 years, around 20 sections have been substituted and inserted in the IT Act of 2008. Won't regulation have to follow technology to ensure, and I think the idea has to be to ensure how it's judiciously done than to question it altogether?
Supriya, I'm losing your voice. I don't know whether you can hear me clearly or not. Can you hear me clearly?
I can hear you loud and clear, Sanjay. Go ahead.
Hello? I've lost your voice. Okay. So, I think the key worry here, the fundamental problem is the political intention of the government. Paradoxically enough, while the government talks about bringing in more stringent regulations to hinder fake news, which is a big threat to Indian democracy, the fact of the matter is that a lot of the fake news that has really originated has happened from within the political party of the Bharatiya Janata Party itself. Now, these are certain hard realities that we cannot ignore. I also want to bring forth this point that the debate on the right to privacy that happened in the Supreme Court, had the government taken extremely, in my opinion, absurd stance where they went and said that the right to privacy is not a fundamental right. We do not even have a right to our bodies. I think these are manifestations of a grave insecurity in terms of the way the government is looking at the proliferation of social media voice, which is very critical if the government begins to clamp on, freedom of expression. Now, don't forget the fact that there are many people from the media, which is a fourth estate and a very, shall we say, seminal cornerstone of our democracy, have faced a lot of aggressive backlash from not just social media trolls, but from the government. People from the media have lost jobs. So I think there is a larger issue here about how does the government of the day perceive the freedom of expression? Is social media going to be clamped down on the pretext of national security? Because you see, Supriya, that definition is extremely universal. What is deemed to be offensive, what is deemed to be sedition, what is considered to be anti-national is now an extremely fluid definition. I mean, by the definition of this government, Naseeruddin Shah is an anti-national. I mean, would anybody buy into that? That's the whole point. So I believe that it is very easy to dismiss it as, technological improvements have happened and therefore we need to keep, making our laws contemporary. Yes, but that does not mean that you actually throttle individual liberty. And most importantly, in a world where the social media is the only instrument of a larger public voice, if that gets killed, then I think we have got a serious challenge as far as liberty and democracy in India is concerned.
Okay, Sanjay, give me a minute now. I'll go across to Sanjay Jain on this. And, from a more nuanced expert perspective, are we really trying to kill a fly here with an atom bomb instead of a sword, like Justice Sri Krishna says to us? I mean, is action disproportionate to what the aim and intended, target is?
So, Supriya, we've looked at this from the perspective of how it affects the software industry and particularly smaller startups. The definition of intermediary to which this ruling applies is actually very wide. When you think about it, you're thinking of large platforms like Facebook, Twitter, etc., but actually also applies to much smaller websites which serve a community of users. They're also technically intermediaries. News sites which have discussion on them are also intermediaries. So in many ways, this applies to a lot of online businesses, which include small businesses as well. And they will be disproportionately affected by the need for compliance. So you can think of somebody who's putting up a jobs portal and they happen to reach a certain critical size, which in this case is 5 million users. And then suddenly they have to comply to a whole bunch of requirements which they otherwise didn't have to. The other is about users. So there's a requirement that you warn users every month about them potentially losing access to the site. And we have learned in the software industry that bulk messages like these tend to get ignored. So, and in fact, they cause only an irritant. So that irritation is not worthwhile. So I think, as a software industry body, we'll be looking to give feedback to the government on how this could impact the smaller companies in the Indian startup ecosystem. And we uh,
There with the Sanjay Jain, I think, is facing some audio trouble, and can we fix that, please, before I go back to him? But Sanjay Hegde, I do want to ask you a quick question, and this question has to be on, are there enough systems in place? I mean, we keep talking about this data privacy bill and all of that, but do we have enough systems in place to ensure data isn't compromised? It's a very sophisticated sort of a war that's playing out there as far as global data wars are concerned, whether it's Russia, whether it's China and all of that. Have we as a country invested enough to ensure data security? I mean, a bill is pending, I understand that. But, if data is breached today, what are the consequences?
There are almost no consequences. Privacy, and especially digital privacy in India, is an underrated virtue. Nobody has really spent time or energy in putting things in place, and there is a feeling that the government can barge into any platform, into anybody's computer, into everything without actually the feeling in government sometimes is that if you do not physically violate the individual but you track his life online, it's all right. We just need to put some pieces of regulation in place or something which authorizes it. We do not today have systems which protect the privacy of users of any platform, nor do we have a system where if privacy is compromised, that there is some kind of compensation or redressal for any person whose digital life is compromised. I also wanted to just make another point. The other point was that government regulation and law seems to be couched in overbroad terms always. The Supreme Court had to strike down 6A when it explained that all speech is not necessarily criminal. Speech could be offensive to some, and if you read the law too broadly, it would fail the test of constitutionality. Speech can be, you can discuss about things, that is not prohibited. You can actually advocate for some changes, that also is not prohibited. It's only when speech turns to incitement to violence that the law needs to step in. Unfortunately, our administrators seem to think that all kinds of speech could be offensive and we should have laws broad enough to catch all and everything. That needs A, to harassment, B, when a law is overbroad, it leads to selective enforcement, and C, it also encourages a general atmosphere of non-compliance.
Yes, it does. Vineet Goenka, while I want you to respond to some of what has been said, just to refer to the IT Act, the IT Act has a very different purpose. It started with the whole premise that platforms will not be responsible for the content that's posted on them. We, in some sense, are turning the entire wheel on it. We are now telling platforms to not just be responsible, but to proactively remove at discretion, maybe with the help of some algorithms and tools. Now, how justified is that? Starting from a premise where they were not responsible to now making them responsible for content and actually entrusting them with time-bound task of pulling out data.
So, no, it was never written anywhere that they are not responsible. It is assumed that it is not responsible. They were preaching this to the world that they are not responsible. They are just an integrator, and so they are not responsible. But if they are making profit, in my personal view, if you are making money out of it, you are very well responsible for what is going on in your platform. should not be responsible. You can't make money here in this country. A. B. The previous speaker spoke about that the government would like to understand what is being spoken by everybody and anybody everywhere. It is incorrect statement and too much of exaggeration. Let me tell you. If there is a law enforcement agency finds a situation, what does it do? Let me give a small case study. If there is somebody been kidnapped right now near your studio, what does the LA do? They would like to intercept all the communication which were there. It may happen that your communication is also intercepted. How would they know that you are criminal or not till they listen to that? So that's a real life case study where we have to give some solution. Also, let me give you another classical case which happened whereby we know about the infamous Radia tapes. We heard voice of Ratan Tata. Actually, they were taping in Radia. But I think probably in that due course, everybody heard the voice of Honorable Ratan Tata ji, whatever he said. And we all made our assumptions about him. Now, these may be pitfalls of, investigations. We also have to understand, while there are good people living around, everybody is good person, but there may be microscopic minority which will not like this country. There may be people who may be criminal. Now, how do you tap them? You can't bind your hands of the law enforcement agency and say that, jaake investigation kar lijiye. So, I think probably giving a lawful ambit. Right now, what is happening is, as rightfully said by Justice Sri Krishna in your own channel, which I heard few minutes back, everybody was doing it. What they were doing was not under the ambit of the constitution. But if there is a consultation done, then the paper is presented in the house.
No.
And
One
house
second,
makes a
Vineet
law,
Goenka.
or there is an ordinance. Both are applicable.
Vineet Goenka. No. Vineet Goenka, let me come in. To your larger point about Justice Sri Krishna, he actually said that's a completely nonsensical argument to give, that just because it was being done unlawfully without a court, we are now trying to put a framework. He actually rubbished my question on that, just to be the devil, just to put the record straight in what Justice Sri Krishna said. But on the Neera Radia tapes, the counter argument to that is that there are 4 or 5 things why you tap phones: national security, integrity of the country, unlawful activity and all of that. I'm wondering, what was Neera Radia? She was not a threat to national security.
Yes, in Neera Radia. What was the case of? So let me put a counter question to you. What was in the Neera Radia case?
Just give me a minute. Give me a minute. Give me a minute. No, give me a minute, Vineet. Give me a minute, Vineet. Because everything will now boil down to who has access to this, who has the privilege and access to this, and which is exactly the question that I want to ask Sanjay. And Sanjay, even as you criticize this, my own contention is that whether it was Neera Radia or whether it was Amar Singh or, that bookie in the cricket case, they were not doing anything that was harming the integrity of the country. There may be some sleazy conversations there, but it was being tapped, which means that this privilege was being misused. So my question is, how do you balance that? And, I think Milind from the Congress has said that it is a derogatory move for these companies and platforms and will have an impact on businesses in India. What exactly does the Congress mean by this? And is it not your party that set the wheels in motion by bringing in this act in the first place, this provision?
Well, I want to make one point here, Supriya. Nobody denies that, information technology laws, every country has struggled with it, whether it's America, whether it's the European Union, it has been a challenge for most governments. Having said that, I think the biggest worry is when a state begins to assume the form of a police state or a big brother. There is no denying this is a young country. We are going to be the biggest consumers of social media, whether it's Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, Snapchat, you name any of these popular global success stories in terms of instant messaging, and India is as big as America or China. And it's likely to get bigger. We are English speaking and technologically savvy. Now, the fundamental point is the government needs to recognize one thing, that yes, it is important to make sure that you don't allow this platform to be abused in terms of communal polarization or, spreading slander. But the danger is that if you have a government that seems to have an overarching interest to know why people are critical of it or why do they ask questions of X, Y, Z, then you begin to enter into an area that is crossing the red line. And I always believe that that is the real challenge for citizens and for an establishment. Now, the government's message should be very clear that we are not going to snoop on you. And we are not going to do so unilaterally and bulldoze your fundamental rights. Now, let me tell you what is worrying, and I'm glad that some other people have already pointed this out. There are a couple of Sanjays in today's panel, and I'm very happy to be in that very august company. But when you have a right to privacy as a fundamental right already confirmed by the Supreme Court, the government's decisions hereafter, like the recent one to appoint 10 very powerful government investigating agencies to snoop into people's smartphones and computers, it needs to be seen in that light. The government cannot pretend that it is not aware, it's oblivious of a very fundamental, kind of a law approved by the Supreme Court by a huge nine-member constitutional bench, and say, I'm anyway going to empower the CBI and many other institutions to look into people's phones.
Right.
We all know the status of CBI today. The CBI is a tool of political vendetta. What confidence does an ordinary citizen have? And let me tell you, Supriya, the people who are really targeted don't have access to law. They don't even have lawyers. And this could be minority members, this could be Dalits, these could be activists who don't really have a plethora of, very powerful legal counsel.
Okay, Sanjay, give me a minute. Sanjay, give me a minute. I want to take this across to Sanjay Jain, just to get an expert perspective. And Sanjay, the aim is to obviously track, posters of unlawful comment, derogatory stuff, fake news crackdown and all of that. While this is a crackdown on big businesses, you believe the cost of compliance is going to go up. How exactly could this end up choking the small startups? I mean, 5 million is hardly a subscriber base. Most of our startups today have that sort of a subscriber base. Could this end up having a collateral damage?
Yes, that's what we are actually about. When we are looking at this change, we get the feedback to be asked around in our community, and a lot of people were very concerned about what it would take to comply to the law and how would they make sure that they are in line with what is required of them. And they felt the cost would be very high, and particularly when you are not making that much money from the users, and while the large platforms are very profitable, small ones certainly struggle a lot. To that extent, cost of compliance, the assumption that automated tools can detect some of these issues is also flawed. And so all of these will become a big burden. And in fact, our local startups might not end up being able to achieve the size that they could then start to compete against the big boys.
No, fair point indeed. And I think, to get to the critical mass, 5 million is hardly a number. But Sanjay Hegde, there are reports that internet companies are already mulling legal actions. So, obviously, do you see that happening? And is that the next, legal front that we will see things unfold? And I also think the important issue here is that there have been issues of misuse, like we were referring to some of the cases in the past. And so the power needs to be vested in very few people. And does the law need to change on that account as well? I mean, who has access to that sort of information? Every constable in the Delhi police can't be having access to what is really sensitive data.
Absolutely. The parameters of who has access to what data and for what purpose and for how long, all these need to be defined, and we are still waiting for the privacy bill to come and make some of those definitions at least. The other point is that, as industry has already told you, 5 million is a very small number. Should they take it to court, there it would all be a question of power. Does the law currently authorize such guidelines or such regulations to be framed? Are the guidelines ultra vires the act? That would be the nature of the challenge. And if such a challenge came in, it would most probably be heard in the first instance by a high court, probably the Delhi High Court, and then maybe later on in the Supreme Court. So the process of challenging the rules itself would take some time, in my opinion. However, if there was an amendment to the act, if it was legislation which would have to be challenged, then the legislation would have to then be tested on the touchstone of the Constitution and on the touchstone of the constitutional right to privacy. That is another ballgame. These are the two possibilities that I see legally.
No, fair point indeed. Vineet Goenka, shouldn't the priority for lawmakers, and I'm really calling out both you and the Congress party on this, shouldn't the priority of the lawmakers really be to get that data privacy bill passed in parliament? I know it's very difficult to make our lawmakers sit and, do what they're supposed to do, and which is why they've been elected, which is to legislate. But shouldn't that be priority? I mean, instead of having these uninformed views being aired by a lot of political class across the spectrum, or the fear that is in the minds of people now that the big state is really snooping down on its citizens, shouldn't a data privacy act be in motion now, and shouldn't that be priority?
So my answer is in four part, each of two lines. Let me complete that. So first part is sovereignty of a country and security of the citizens has got no cost implication. Any cost, you have to maintain the sovereignty and the security of the citizens. So that's my personal statement. Also, any sensible person will adhere to this particular statement. A. B. Because the state right now, the power in the place is concerned about the citizen. That's why there was a consultative process for the privacy bill, which you have seen through Justice Sri Krishna committee, which has been doing that. A. On the other hand, there is one officer level meeting been organized with the social media companies. How do you stop this kind of menace if there is a menace? I think that consultative process was never there in the country, and I'm talking about these two particular processes in place. Third, we have seen in past law enforcement agencies either on their own or in the direction of the state have intervened, and we have ill-famous cases of Radia cases. I really don't know under which law and where they aware before the tapes were recorded that there were unlawful conversation going on. So that is one. Fourth part is Congress has no right to speak on this, on privacy or on security of this thing. We have seen 1975 and what they did in emergency and then subsequent years of this. We also saw one of the prime ministers being asked to leave the office by Congress on the virtue of spying. So probably all these kind of things, I think what is going on right now is very, very good. There is a consultation going on and citizens of the country are also participating. Sri Krishna report, Justice Sri Krishna got more than 600 suggestions. I'm sure he would have considered each of the suggestion in the light of given it, and then probably the new draft would have come out. So here we have a good days. We have people who are listening, who are fighting. But we have to understand one thing: technology is changing every day. You cannot have law and then wait for disasters to happen. You have to be dynamic. You have to consider the dynamism of this thing. While you're doing this, there may be a cost implication which we all would bear it. And it is improper to say the cost of access to information may go up if it has been localized. I rather feel if there is a sovereignty and localization of data, the cost will come down. And all these overseas data banks and data centers which are there will have to comply with Indian laws if they want to do business. We are 1/6 of human beings across the world. We have very, very big consumer power. If they want to do business here, they jolly well follow our laws.
Vineet, you are really talking about... Okay, Vineet, you are essentially justifying all of this in the name of data sovereignty. I don't know how much of an ice is that cut because the bill has to be passed for the data to be sovereign. But Sanjay Jha wants to come in, and Sanjay, even as you respond to some of the points being made, I do want to touch upon fake news because that is quite a menace. It is partial truth, sometimes deceived, sometimes presented in the non-format and everything. But it is the action, at least on the face of it, is being justified in the name of curbing fake news. Given the fact that a lot of people, including some very eminent jury members that we've spoken to, believe that this should fall under the IPC. I mean, will the Congress party support a move like this? I'll get your reaction and then get Sanjay Hegde as well on this. Sanjay Jha.
Supriya, a very pertinent question, and I'm saying so with full responsibility, that fake news is a danger to any democracy in the world because it misleads the people, it destroys principles, it destroys reputations, and it indulges in all kinds of vicious propaganda. Like for example, I mean, at the end of the day, look at Donald Trump. He's uttered over 7,500 lies, but then there are fake news sites that basically expose them. And I can tell you, Vineet Goenka, with due respects, his party is probably the world's biggest originator of fake news. I think it damages Indian democracy. And I'll tell you the point here. You see, end of day, Supriya, think about it. When you look at data, hard data, Aadhaar, remember that all the data is already out. The Supreme Court later on said it is not mandatory for bank accounts or for mobile phones. But the data that you and I have already given for mutual funds and what have you is out there. You know, what do you mean by the destruction of data? Has the government done something about it? They won't, because once the data is out, it's gone. So the government has basically, in my opinion, committed an act of the ultimate political immorality. He seized the data of the common man, and now that the Supreme Court verdict, which was sub judice, but they went and insisted we had it, they have no way of telling us that our data has been destroyed. I mean, these are very seminal challenges that we need to debate, and I'm glad you're talking about them. But last but not the least, I come back to the political, shall we say, manipulation. The Aadhaar bill, which we all knew from the very beginning was, primarily intended to create electronic surveillance. This bill was introduced by the government as a money bill because they did not want it to be debated in the Rajya Sabha, but the opposition would have asked tough questions. It would have been in the public domain, and possibly you would have seen the activists protest, which they did, thank God. But the truth is, this government has not come clean at all. And I think that is the biggest worry, because let me tell you, Supriya, all these decisions ultimately are political calls.
Okay, very quickly then, I'm going to close this show and I will quickly give a question to Sanjay Hegde. So A, should fake news not be treated under the IPC, and that's where it should really rest? And B, what would you tell to a lot of people out there? There are a lot of netizens, there are a lot of consumers who are very worried. I mean, how would you, because the level of awareness is extremely low. What are you going to tell them? What if they get caught on the wrong side of offensive posts and, being pinned down and all of that? It's not as if our laws have kept pace with changing technology. What are you going to tell them? How do they need to be more aware?
They need to be more aware when they post anything or which incites violence. Please do not touch any such forwards. Just delete it, get out of it. The other thing is, fake news can be fake news of all kinds. You can say that you have a 60-inch chest, that could be fake news, but that is not relevant. All that we need to concentrate on is any news or video which incites violence between communities, and that is the only part of it which needs to be cracked down. The rest of it, technology will find its own ways. As somebody said, that for every bit of fake news, there are news checking and fact checking sites. People will, in the end, average all that out. But things which cause violence, that's the only thing that you need to be worried about, and that's the thing to avoid at all costs. Please use social media as you use normal speech. You do not speak unnecessarily things which would cause a fight. Use that as a guiding principle.
Well, that's a very important word of advice coming in from one of the best lawyers that I know of, that you cannot be resorting to or forwarding or subscribing or endorsing anything that incites violence. That should also be, in fact, stretched a little bit on verbal abuse. Some of the verbal abuse on social media is best avoidable. But thank you very, very much, gentlemen. Sanjay Jha, Sanjay Jain, Sanjay Hegde, and of course, Vineet Goenka, for the spirited discussion. I think we need to keep talking on this provision, because there is so much of fear and there is so much of concern and perhaps a little misguided views out there that need to be addressed every time we talk on this matter. But thank you very much for sparing time and speaking to us this evening on what many believe is a law that could change the way we use, consume and endorse social media. On that note, time for a quick breather, but up next is Top 10 at 10.